So I want to read the lyric here to make sure, in case you didn't hear it. So I've got a long list of real good reasons for all the things I've done. I've got a picture in the back of my mind of what I've lost and what I've won. I've survived every situation, knowing when to freeze and when to run. And regret is just a memory written on my brow, and there's nothing I can do about it now. There's a lot packed into those lyrics, I feel. I mean, if we're you got a really long list of reasons for all the things you've done, and that picture in the back of your mind, you weigh everything as whether it's a win for you or a loss for you, and you've got a boatload of agendas, and these agendas are nested within agendas, nested with agendas, to the point that you've lost track of what the overarching, there might be some really grand, overarching, even spiritual agenda, and then below that there's an agenda that gets manifested in this world, and then the character you are in this world starts with a certain agenda, and all these agendas are trying to feed, the upper agendas, as above, so below cliche. So if you're going to, let me back up. These agendas lead you to do things that you later regret. And there's a regret that you experience because of suffering the consequences. That's, the criminal is sorry he got caught. The old cliche, are you sorry you did it, or are you sorry you got caught? So we all have regrets that, if we're honest with ourselves, it's because we're suffering the consequences, and we think, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. But there's another kind of regret that comes from a shift in perspective. Shift in perspective. You've changed. You've become a different person. And what actually got me, the notes that I started, with a bit of writing I started to do that kind of led to this talk, was in response to an article that I think Phil or somebody sent around. It was called "The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying," and it was some survey, interviews with countless people who were in hospice care dying, and what do you regret? And it was the answers were, the top 5 were exactly what you would expect. I regret not spending more time with my family, not showing somebody more love, I regret all the time that I worked. So that's a regret. That person has become a different person, so to speak, or in many ways, and their perspective is shifted. And now looking in the rearview mirror, they regret those things. But there's another perspective attainable, and it doesn't necessarily require enlightenment to reach this perspective. And I think a lot of people, I think it's part of the process of dying, actually. Not everybody maybe gets to this perspective, but I know people do, and that is, this idea that there's nothing you can do about it now. And I know just what I don't remember if I played it long enough to hear the lyrics saying, where he says, and if there was some way I could go back in time, if there's some way I could go back in time somehow, I know just what I'd change, but there's nothing I can do about it now. Well, there's a perspective you get to that you realize if you went back in time, you wouldn't change anything, because you forgive that person, you understand, you see that person from a superior vantage point, and realize that they were doing the best they could do. And that's, if you went back in time again somehow, you would have to be that person, and you would do exactly the same thing again. So I think that's, so we have agendas, and I thought it would be useful to examine how those agendas tally with life stages. And I think the blurb I gave Anita for the talk was kind of a paragraph lifted from here, and it's our lives. The analogy is we live our lives unconsciously. And by the way, it makes me remember. I gotta say that you cannot think your way into this. You can't relax your way into it. You cannot be talked into it. You cannot talk yourself into it. You cannot imagine your way into it. There's only one way to get to find the answer. I mean, there's many ways of manifesting a path, but at the end of the day, you're not going to get the answer by picking a formula that you expect is going to deliver a profit. When somebody says, okay, do this breathing exercise or do this zazen exercise or whatever. There's an ego motive in there. Obviously, you're doing an exercise to get a result in the same way you would lift weights to build your muscles. And I'm not saying that that's a reason therefore you should not do any of those exercises, but I'm just saying that it's if you want a final answer, if you want to know where you came from, who you really are at your core, and where you're going. Those are the three questions that Rose always told us all philosophies and religions needed to answer. If you want an ultimate, final, absolute answer, you can't be postulating in advance what that answer looks like. And one of the traps is these things that add something to you. This realization is not an addition; it's a subtraction. And I know this is a mature audience in terms of seekers. People have read this stuff, heard it. But the thing is, it doesn't mean that you don't do all these very same things. On my own path, I was raised as I was a devout Catholic, and when I left the church, years later, I stumbled into Rose. I had no idea that any of this stuff existed, that there was such a thing as philosophy and spiritual work. So it was totally foreign to me. And in fact, I'm digressing yet again here. I'll get back. But, he told me that if I wanted to find anything out, I had to look at myself. If these meditation techniques, I think I'm going to gain something, and but everybody has a natural inclination to introspection. I mean, even if you're, Joe Sixpack, who had never heard of philosophy, something, you have an argument with your wife, or you feel trapped in your job, you're not paying your bills, and you're wondering where your life's going to go. You go home, and when in a quiet moment, your attention falls back in on itself. You look inside, and that looking is a direction, and that is the path. It's the path that I see, that I can overlay on every journey I've heard everybody make. That was successful. It was a reversing the direction of the attention. Our attention is focused outward, and so that gets. It's like we're driving a car. We're at the center of motion swirling around us, and the world's whizzing by, and things come, and we think we're in control, but we're really in reactive mode. A car comes, swerves in front of us, and we swerve left, we slow up, we slow down, we brake, we accelerate. And most of the time on a long drive, you completely forget yourself. You drive for 100 miles and you miss your exit, or you get to your exit and you think, my God, how could I be here already? You get lost in daydreaming and conversation, and that's exactly what goes on in your life. You're at the lowest, the most detailed level. The body has an agenda, and you're a victim of that. Your attention, and when I say you're a victim, I mean the body is driving where the attention goes, and the part of you that makes you feel conscious and alive, it disappears for long periods of time, just like you do when you're driving. So my catchphrase for that is you're too busy being you to actually look at what you are. And then when you have a free moment, or you're inspired, or something evokes, that's more, it's not, inspire is the wrong word, something evokes it because something throws you back on yourself, and you look at yourself. The process, that's going within, and going within is the experience of that focus of attention is a loss of self. I mean, you may not, I mean, I never articulated it that way to me. I mean, I came to all this and looking retroactively on my path and what happened. So maybe that's my story, you know, look, that I'm overlaying on it. Maybe it's not as generic as I think it might be, but anyway, it's my story and I'm sticking to it. So you look away from things that, you look away from that which is drawing you within, going within. You look away from it to back outward. So we spin things, you know, you have a reason for everything you did, and with rationalization, and you keep track, you keep score. There's something in you that's keeping score, and I think I think it connects to the chart that I'm about to put up. So I guess to recap that theme, or that paragraph, is, for me, the spiritual path is exactly what Maharishi and Nisargadatta and Richard Rose said, and that is, it's going within, it's looking at the self, and you got to figure out how to do that. And you know, it could be looking at your thoughts, looking at behavior, looking at your trying to ferret out your motivations, discover your agendas, and yes, having a mystical look too. You know, trying to look directly and see if you can directly ask the question, who am I? And see, where does this sense of self arise from? I think I did that in my meditation, but I wasn't conscious of doing it. My meditational practice was pretty much always sitting, doing, like, I don't know, a minute or less of breathing, just to kind of calm myself down, get the body relaxed, slow the thoughts down. And then I would say a little prayer to myself, I guess carry over from my Catholic beliefs. You know, there were three things. It was like, Father, bless me that I might see clearly. So I thought, you know, I'm lost if I can't see clearly. You know, that's the thing that Rose said. If you look, first of all, you have to look, and then you have to understand that you don't see clearly. You know, so if you look and question yourself and develop your intuition and clarify your seeing, and you make that your absolute number one priority and commit yourself to it, you have to make it a vector. You know, so it becomes a habit. Doesn't mean you can't have a livelihood. He was very encouraging and adamant about pushing people, you know, get a job, you know, get a degree, you know, always, you know, every job you take should be an improvement over the previous job you took. But it's just a begging bowl. You can only have number one priority. If you did all those things, you would find an answer. And if you didn't, you know, the way he put it to me, you know, and if you can't do those things, well, then you'll die like a dog and never know, well, that you were everything and nothing. You know, you'll never find out what you really were, what your core being was. So it might be useful to think, well, how do these stories get started? How do these agendas develop? Because we're all lost in them, whether I didn't finish saying the thing about my Catholic faith. You know, so when I encountered Rose, I thought I was so superior to those poor Christian fundamentalists. You know, they believe in heaven and hell, and they believe in sin and good deeds, and you know, some of them maybe even pay money for indulgences. I went to a Catholic school, and the nuns used to sell cards, and you know, like I could buy a card for 50 cents, and I could get a plenary indulgence. There were cards that had, there were what were the less than plenary? There was a lower indulgence. There was a name for the lower indulgences, and they knocked off so many years in purgatory. But I mean, you laugh at it. This is medieval, but when I was in Catholic grade school in the 60s, I guess. I was born in 53, so whatever that was. They were the good sisters of the St. Vincent de Paul Society were selling us mints for a nickel, and they sold holy cards. And some of them had plenary indulgences, which wipes the slate absolutely clean. You sin, which separates you from God, and buying this card wipes that slate clean. And now I don't want to be too hard on, but I'm digressing. I need to keep on. I don't want to lose time for questions. So when is my session over?
I'm in charge of the timing thing here, so 11:45.
Okay, good, thanks. So I met Rose and I started following this path, and I thought, and Rose talked about the Zen transmission, direct mind-to-mind transmission. So, and without going down that whole long path, he absolutely had a capacity to, and don't think of transmission as, there's like a pipe and something moves from point A to point B and you get zapped. I mean, I guess that's what Shakti, that's what a lot of these gurus out of India were doing. And when I was in college, people were like Muktananda and the 14-year-old boy Raghu Maharaji. They learned some technique, which I don't know if it was an energy transfer, but it could zap people. He had the ability to project energy, no doubt about it. But this idea of transmission, the way I would explain it is more like, I remember being a little kid and you'd lay down in the grass with your friend and you'd gaze at the clouds and you'd say, oh, you see that dragon up there? No, I don't see it. No, you see that little corner, that shape there, that form? You see that form, and then look down there, you see another form, and all of a sudden the other person would say, you'd have the experience, boom, you see it. That's maybe a crude explanation of transmission. Rose likened it to a spark gap. It's like if you maybe a tuning fork is a better analogy. So anyway, he absolutely had the capacity to do that. So I was waiting for him to zap me, and I was trying to. I made a commitment to a spiritual path. I dropped out of school. I wasn't too concerned about career. I started up a group in Columbus when I was 19 years old. I guess I turned 20 at that point. It was very traumatic. I was a very shy person. It was very traumatic. I felt like, what do I know? I'm going to be doing group meetings and telling people about what a spiritual path is. But anyway, I did all these things, but I never felt like I was doing them to the degree that Rose said that this is the path, and if you can do this, I felt like I was always on the fence, could never commit myself 100%, but then I wouldn't actually go the other way. Like some people would leave the group, and come back 10 years later, go out. I could never do either. So for decades, for 20 years, I was on this fence. And in the end, when I got married, like Doran said, I got married. That happened very quickly, by the way. I got married, moved. My wife quit her job. We bought a house. We had a baby in the space of 11 months. And I was self-employed. And I was in fear that my business was going to collapse. I just didn't see how it could survive. I developed a software package I was selling to printing companies and making a living on. It was written for a DOS world, and Windows was out. Windows 95. I'm still trying to sell this DOS program, and I was making a living supporting the customer base. So I was too busy generating the revenues to reinvent the wheel. So I got a mortgage and a kid, and so I was under a lot of stress about. But anyway, so that was kind of like, I feel it was part of the unraveling, and I don't want to spend time telling that whole story. But in retrospect, looking back at it, I realized that I had the same, my basic core Catholic beliefs were at the root of all my fancy. I heard all the spiritual teachings for 20 years. The path is subtractive. It's not additive. You have to, you have to get beyond thought. You have to, you can't stop thinking. All these things that I thought I could do it or should avoid. Good works aren't going to do it. I realized that I was I believed in believed in the indulgence theory. I was living a good life. I was a good person. I was doing good things, and I was making deposits into my spiritual bank account. And Rose often said, "Well, if you don't have this realization," his realization experience was a grand mal event, like somebody was talking about. And he said over the years, he kind of poo-pooed these Zen stories, where they shut the gate and stubbed his finger. Whereupon he just poo-pooed that stuff and said, "This is fantasy. This is not enlightenment." He said, "You get enlightened, they're going to carry you out on a stretcher." And he gave stories of people like that who had those experiences, like Paul Wood, who dropped nuclear bombs during the war, or bombs, and then he couldn't reconcile that with how God observes the fall of the sparrow, and yet he could allow this bombing to happen, and that was what threw his attention back in on himself, and he was so obsessed with it, his life fell apart. He became a car salesman, and nobody, he couldn't sell cars. And he had one day he just put his head down on his desk and prayed. He was saying the Lord's Prayer. He was meditating on the Lord's Prayer because that's the only thing he knew how to do. Didn't have any philosophical training. And one day he prayed for God to kill him, and they carried him on a stretcher. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks. And for 2 weeks he was in some state. So that was one. Rose always offered him up as the most dramatic example of an enlightenment experience. And during that 2-week time, he said the guy had the ability to turn his attention to any place in time and space and see any piece of creation. He could witness, the wars in the past or whatever. But he could do this because he was beyond. He was a timeless, spaceless a timeless, spaceless point of observation. Anyway, I'm rambling too much. So I just, I found that I had those same beliefs. So my point is you may think, I thought I was a very mature seeker and way above all that, but unless you unravel this layers of onions, you got to somehow retraverse the projected ray, is the phrase that Rose came up, retraversing the projected ray. There's this attention that's been this ray from the absolute. And let's not try to define that, but here you are, you arrive here one day as a conscious individual. So let me get the chart up at this point. So this idea that's too busy being you, the daily story of your life gives you all you need to look at. You really don't need techniques. I think looking directly at the story of your life and, waking up each day. And, I did what the Catholics call the daily examination of conscience. To me, that was very meaningful. It's like when I was younger, I would, after a bout of confrontation from Rose, I'd maybe go off in the woods and meditate and think, what am I doing with my life? What do I want? I do that kind of looking inside and just try to be honest with myself. So on this chart here, we have life stages from prenatal, birth, infancy, childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, established adult, middle-aged adult, aging adult, twilight years, deathbed, death event. And then, so this is the story structure, if you will, if it makes sense to this. And you could probably think about this and fill in some of your own ideas on these things. But at each life stage has characteristics. And there's an experience. There's an experience with each life stage. We are not the experience, but there's an experience that's imposed on us, largely from the body. And there's an agenda. This is where we lose ourselves. This is where we lose who touch with our being. And then there's a theme. So characteristics and experience and agenda and theme. And maybe the columns could have been reversed differently. So prenatal, the characteristics, unbounded awareness, descending into bounded form. It's undifferentiated awareness, becoming differentiated. There's a formation of a sensory apparatus. I mean, if you think about it, it's like the evolution of the birth of a human being. From embryo to death, we seem to come out of nothing. Well, do you think that the awareness is generated by a body? That's not I can't prove that much to you, and so I guess I'm not claiming that this is scientific, but I liken it to a jack-o'-lantern. That's one of my favorite analogies. So you've got a form, you create a form, and you carve a face on the form, but it's just a form. But then when you put a candle inside the pumpkin and look at it from the outside, it's enlivened, it's animated somehow. And light is invisible. I mean, you can see the candle flame, but you can't see the light. Light is not visible. So the form is enlivened. So that's my idea of the prenatal. It's unbounded awareness, differentiating in form. So there's really, I'm not professing to tell you when the exact line occurs, when experience begins and an I forms, but the experience would be, there really isn't any, there's unity. Provocation of consciousness, the birth of an experiencer. And the important thing is there's absolutely no agenda. And if there's a theme, well, I mean, this doesn't sound like a theme, but the theme would be birth of individual consciousness. I got this written on my paper. I could be facing you instead of. So it's the birth of individual consciousness. There's a stream of experience begins the story of the individual. Introduction to distinction, perfect comfort versus pain, loud noises, host stresses, etc. When I was writing up these notes quite a few months ago, I actually gave this presentation at a TAP meeting about a year ago or 9 months ago, I don't remember. I did some research because I thought the question came to my mind is, do babies dream? I mean, infants in the fetuses, do they dream? I thought, well, there must be some research on it. So when I did that, I ran it. My God, there's all this research, all this new equipment, there's resonances, and so, yeah, they indeed. I have it written down here, but it's not important. There's some number of weeks, maybe it's 27 weeks. I don't know. There's a certain point in time where a baby starts to have REM movements, and they smile, they yawn, the body does what is this equivalent of crying. So it doesn't matter when. The point is that there is some progression and some point in this progression at which the form and the apparatus is sufficiently evolved that it can register experience. And the idea is that first, there's some first experience. There has to be some first experience. And I think when that first experience happens is when, all of a sudden there's a pre-consciousness. It's like, I don't know what's conscious, but it's like that first experience, the eyes opened. And then there's another experience. Maybe it's instantaneous, the next experience. Actually, maybe the next experience is that mechanism's capacity, because the capacity of attention precedes us. Awareness and the capacity of witnessing doesn't belong to the form, and it animates and powers the form. So maybe the first time that happens, it instantly sets in motion the loop. So the second experience is noticing the first one, or maybe the second experience is another percept coming. And the point is that this stream of experience, once it's started, it generates a sense of self. It's a very undefined self. It's not very. It's like at that point in time, there's not. Maybe you can't really call it an I. It's not. It's definitely not associated with a body. So enough on that. So the birth event. So this is an uncontrolled, unexpected, uncontrolled event. And I've got a begin-end block here. I'm a programmer, so you have an expected uncontrolled event and an expected uncontrolled event. And sandwiched in between these two uncontrolled events of birth and death, you have this story structure. And the birth event, the experience is pain and trauma. There is no agenda. The theme is it's a transformational launch. So, boom, individuality affirmed. I've written somewhere that experience is binding and intense experience is intensely binding. And, witnessing, experiencing is liberating. So, the pain and trauma, this uncontrolled, unexpected event, it launches this being and they come out crying or have to be slapped to cry. That's another experience. So they are now launched as an individual in the sense that they're an experiencer in a body. There still seem to be, babies are still, that gets into the next stage, infancy. The characteristics are a new and novel sensory stream. The attention moves between unbounded awareness and body-bounded experience. It's been a long time, so the strength of my memory is fading, but I remember holding my kids when they were babies or being around other babies, and they're somewhere else. They're not entirely here. They're definitely in their own world, but they're definitely more connected to this. There's something. If I drew a big circle around this entire chart, they're definitely more connected with that, and we coax them out of that. Rose called them. Used to say we seduce babies into living. So they move between this new experience and the unbounded awareness. So that's the characteristics. The experience they have is they oscillate between pain and pleasure. The agenda starts to form. The first agenda is to avoid pain and return to the womb. Swaddling. When I learned about swaddling with our first child, I was amazed because it's like, no, you got to wrap them really tight. Well, I don't want to hurt them. No, they want to get back to the womb. They want to get back to that perfect experience where everything was it's an avoidance of pain. And yet they also want to engage with the senses. So the theme of that is seduction into the world, connecting with a new reality. They're descending into this dream world here. And then we have childhood. The characteristics are disidentification with the mother. Body and soul, because there's kind of one and the same. Consciousness of a separate body grows. A loss of unity with awareness begins. They become conscious of their body's vulnerability. And it's during this time, I think that the escape from that is into ego identity. So the experience is discovery of the body. Every sensory experience is new. Conflict with the environment, it manifests. All of a sudden they get hungry, and it's not they were never hungry before, and not only do they get hungry, but it goes unsatisfied for some period of time, and they want that. So they're in conflict with the environment. They're acquiring an identity, and the agenda is to make the world conform. They want the world to do what they want it to do. So I'm telling you, this may sound abstract, but this is like the underpinnings, and then you down 50s 1,000 layers or whatever, and something doesn't the dynamic of something that upsets you or you get angry about. Adults manifest anger in a sophisticated way, but at the end of the day, it's not that much different from a 2-year-old jumping up and down, stomping their feet. It's very similar. I mean, I've seen it in myself. I feel like, and I actually saw a group member do that once. If you remember, we did a group picture at the farm one time, and one of the people, I don't want to name any names, but he missed the picture, and he literally jumped up and down and was yelling. He didn't get to be in the picture. So The child, and during childhood, we're acquiring an identity. We're trying to make the world conform, and at the same time, we're having to adjust. And the theme is we're becoming the body. We're becoming in the world, becoming independent of the mother body. This is where we're getting in childhood. You always hear about you got to become like a child again, and well, it's almost too late. You got to become like a child again, but the child is already working on building an identity. But they're still pretty open, aren't they? So then adolescence comes, and the characteristics, full independent body-based consciousness. The ego personality is really in ascendance. But there's also a peak of uncertainty. Adolescents are really troubled. It's really hard to get through adolescence. I was a brooding, troubled adolescent, not because I had any, great trauma in my life. I had a basically solid, easy, middle-class upbringing. So I think it's a full escape from the other side into this side. That's when we fully become embedded in, we are the body. I have a body. I am this this personality, this persona, this sense of self that owns a body. And of course, the experience hormones take sensory experience to a new level. The agenda is defining and affirming a fragile identity. And the theme is becoming the ego identity. The child becomes an adult. Then by the time of young adulthood, the open window of betweenness closes. Even though your full independent body-based consciousness, ego personality is in ascendance, you haven't completely lost touch with this. As a young adult, I think the window really closes on you, and now it's going to take a hell of a lot of introspection and grace to open that window back up and let you see clearly. So the experience in young adulthood, dissatisfaction really germinates. The identity is swallowed by the world. Adolescents, they've got to find their place in the world. Even in high school, as young as you are, I looked on my daughters when they were in high school. I thought they're babies, and yet I remember when I was at that age, you were supposed to be thinking about what you were going to become, and I never knew what I wanted to become. So the theme at this point really, try that for the storyline. This now rooted ego in this body personality that has lost touch, because it was this descendant. But there's the fact that any of this can happen is that attention, awareness is a power that does not belong to you. Awareness does not need you. You need awareness. The point of this is that experience generates consciousness. I equate generates an experiencer. So no experience, no I. And that's why when you go to sleep at night, when you're dreaming, there's some vague sense of I, because there's content. There's the content and consciousness, which is an experience, and the experience generates the I sense. And as soon as that experience goes away and you're in deep sleep, there's no sense of I. And people say, oh, well, I disappear in sleep. Well, how many times a day do you disappear during waking state? Absolutely the same thing happens. The content of consciousness goes down to such a low ebb that you disappear. And if you really look at this, you find out that you never disappeared, that the awareness never stopped. That, I mean, you can see this. I've said this many times. When you come out of a dream at night, I never studied my dreams per se, or I maybe kept a journal very briefly for a short period of time, but over my life, I've had dreams where you wake up and something about it, you really wake up and then you had some strange dream and it seemed to have special importance or had a special mood. Usually for me, that was always a more significant thing. So you think, boy, what was it? And you're trying to remember the dream. So you're trying to look into this experience that you had in sleep and recall the content as a way of recalling the, understanding the importance of it. But it slips away like sand through your hand because, you weren't fully there. And so at some point you give up. But during that interval, you're staring intently, looking at the content of this experience, and then you stop. And that concentration of attention is coasting, but now it doesn't have any object to latch onto. And I think it is that moment where there is an opportunity to see directly, and it's during that moment that you realize that you were never not aware the whole while you were sleeping. I had this really came on me in the days right after my realization. I became kind of my mind became obsessed with explaining all kinds of things, and that you cannot explain. And my work required extreme attention. I'm programming, so I'm sitting in front of a computer screen trying to hold a whole bunch of symbols and logic in my head long enough that I can figure out the solution and translate it to code on the page. And if I get interrupted and I drop that, I have to start all over again. It's demanding, it's difficult. So I would do this stuff, and then I would think, well, where did this awareness go during that period of time? Well, I mean, I seem to disappear. And if I saw where I came from and where I'm going after death, then how could I disappear? And every time that I stopped at that point and looked at that, I felt the connection again. I felt like, well, no, it was unbroken. I never wasn't the awareness. The awareness was the background, the backdrop of that experience the whole time. But the I really requires a lot of content and stuff going on to evoke. They're like parallel. They appear at the same time. So in this young adulthood, there's a part of us that way back there in the outermost agenda. Maybe the outermost agenda here is not our agenda at all. Maybe it's, maybe this is where on the level that some of the nonsensical sounding spiritual cliches come in to have validity. Things like, well, it's God discovering God, or like Rose writes somewhere he has a poem called The Mirror, and the last line of it is, where God has had enough of the endless, infinite possibilities of adventure into himself. Or in the 3 books of the Absolute, he writes how, like, eternity, I won't get the words right, but like eternity convulses. You probably remember the words, like the pralaya. There's all these Hindu terms, because like a blind minnow in an infinite ocean, and he rants and raves because he can't find his edges. So it's this. I get this. I always had this image like of, well, what would if God held up a mirror? What would he see? And even God does not have the power to divide himself. So everything he touches, I'm using a bad choice of word here, God and he, but everything he touches is God. He cannot divide himself. So when he opens that mirror up, there's the whole cosmos in there. But the awareness and consciousness, just at the instantaneous where the eye contact would take place, it doesn't quite take place because the reflection in the mirror turns away into that vastness. And that's kind of like an explanation I gave to myself that kind of explains the mechanics of all this. It's so maybe that's the overriding theme. But back to the young adulthood, finding his place in the world, he's looking in the wrong direction. If he really wants to find out who and what he is, it's not going to work doing it through identity and body and individual sense of self. So the theme from one perspective is all things betray thee who betrayest me. There's been a lot of quotes of Francis Thomas this weekend. So then you get to middle-aged adult, aging adult, established adult, middle-aged adult, aging adult, and the characteristics are pretty much nature's autopilot. You're on autopilot at this point. And, the experience, it's just more of the same. It's, blah, 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 blah. And the agenda, your agenda is, staying alive, staying alive, staying alive. And then the themes at each stage are, naught shelters thee who wilt not shelter me. Naught contents thee who contents not me. Thou dravest love from thee who dravest me. And that's pretty much describes our adult years. And then you get to an aging adult. You're still on. I'm sorry. Twilight years. Nature's disengage routine kicks in. There seems to be a program. There's this is a common pattern, right? You can witness it in virtually all protoplasm. From amoebas to, well, maybe that's a stretch, but probably an earthworm. It has a life cycle of birth, it matures, and I certainly. Pets. I don't think it's we're anthropomorphizing or projecting human qualities. I perceive that animals are pretty much just like us in terms of awareness, experience. They have a sense of self, but they're more like up here at this end of the scale. They don't really get into developing an identity. They never become adolescents. Maybe that's it. But so they all go through the same experience. The cliche of the old dog. The old wise old. There's some old dogs that just seem like they have a wisdom about them. They understand. They know the score. They know that they're aware that they're gonna die somehow. They seem to know. That can be real sad. I've had pets. So there's a churning of organic mass. There's a loosening of awareness from form. I think it's a natural part of aging. There's a loosening for many people. So, and the variation becomes like. Well, I hate to get political, but it's hard for me to imagine Donald Trump being that reflective on his deathbed, but who am I to judge? It might be a terrible thing to say. And I'm not making any comment. I'm against anybody or for anybody. my only point there, he was an obvious example, because the point is somebody that is so vested in their identity. They're so vested. Like I think of people that at very advanced age are still trying to maintain a specific appearance. My mom was that way. My mom was 90, in her 90s. It's like before she walked, she was in assisted living, and before she walked down the hall, she had to get her makeup on, and she was always with her jewelry on. And I'm not, it was endearing in a way, but she was very hanging on to that. And, people do what they need to do to prepare to die. Everybody has to reconcile themselves and go through the process. And so I'm not criticizing. My point is that on the deathbed, I can see that for some people, this loosening of awareness from form is either easy or harder. For some people, it doesn't loosen. Maybe it loosens a tiny bit, and it's at the very end. For other people, it happens much quicker. So the experience is oscillating between pain and pleasure, regret and acceptance. And the agenda is hopefully reflection, understanding. Perhaps there's denial. I think it's it's a real opportunity for somebody if they've developed a vector of the attention to their life. It's a time where they can naturally look at things. And they might the theme is they that's manifesting in their whole pattern is, who was I and what was this? Who was I and what was this life? And if they dwell on it long enough, they may see, if they get that perspective where they look back and beyond regret and realize that everything that happened exactly as it had to happen, they might see the whole arch as a tale of love. So then deathbed, most people, unless they, crane drops on their car when they're traveling on the interstate, which happened to somebody when I lived in Raleigh. It was in the newspaper years ago. Remember that volunteer? He was a lawyer, and he was doing pro bono work. So he was driving back from Winston-Salem to Greensboro, and they had all the construction going on. There was a crane parked in the. I drove by that crane many times. And so when I read the article, I knew the crane. I knew the exact spot. And I'm thinking, this guy just did his pro bono work. He's driving back home, and this crane fell on his Honda Civic and just crushed it. So instantly, he was snuffed out. So, I don't know how much time there was for any. Awareness didn't cease because that individual consciousness experiencer ceased, but there's something magical. Maybe this is one of the themes of the absolute, is for the drop for the boundaries that define that little drop in the ocean before the boundary dissolves, for that drop to know that it is the ocean while a drop. Is that important? Does it matter? Not in any. It matters if it matters to you, but there seems to be something in us as a drop. We don't want to be just a drop. We want to. So the deathbed, impending dissolution of individuality, the ascension, release of awareness from bounded form. The experience, there's fear, pain, anger, sorrow, love, acceptance. Hospice people are experts on death. Their writings, they've got the whole thing down to a science. They can tell you with the emotions. They can tell you how close somebody is to death. In large part, they're not only by their vital signs, but they're like with my mother. She kept wanting to get up. She wanted to. They get really restless with their hands. They want to pull the covers off because they know there's some place they have to go, and they don't know where that is. All they know is that they aren't there. And then there's a lot of medical signs, but there's all. I was talking to a hospice nurse, and she described some of the things that she saw, because I witnessed some things that my mother went through when I spent the night there a week before she died, and she had a tough time. And there's all kinds of, like, one story that the hospice worker told us was of a person who, like, the model church-going, never said an unpleasant word to any human being, was volunteered for everything. Their whole family was a model. And then this woman on her deathbed was just cursing up a storm and yelling and had all this rage. And what it was is there were some real skeletons in the closet in the family, unresolved angers. And so the hospice is what she was telling me, that all this stuff, part of the process of dying, people have, it's like they can't, they don't let go until they've resolved certain things. It's an unexpected event, but there seems to be some wiggle room as to the moment in time. People can, there's some point where they actually let go. And so they're hanging on for various reasons, and some of the reasons are resolving things that trigger this fear, pain, anger, sorrow, love, and acceptance. So the theme is a phrase from Rose's writing, "Peace to the Wanderer," because that's what this whole thing was, the story was. So the death event, expected but uncontrolled, cessation of the experiencer, immersion in unity, back where we started. No agenda. It's the ultimate diminishment of individuality. So I don't know how useful that is. Obviously I think it has usefulness, but you can do it, you'll have to figure out whether it has, what value it might have to you. So I pretty much can take questions anytime. I did have, so what are the overarching lifelong story themes? And I wrote down a few bullet points here. One, expressing ourselves. We have this drive to manifest and reflect back to ourselves who and what we are. And that's where we get lost. We need to know who we are. We arrive here feeling to be alive, but what are we? So we're trying to see what we are, and we need to see who we are. And we do that by trying to manifest in the world and reflect back to us who we are. And it's never going to work because we're looking in the wrong direction. These Francis Thompson quotes, that's why they're so poignant. Another overarching lifelong story theme is overcoming obstacles. Regardless of their nature, at their root is survival and establishing a self-definition. So, we're trying to desperately to be, but what we're trying to be is destined to fail. Expressing love and searching for love is another arch theme. I think all of these themes are echoes of a deeper theme, deeper storyline. We have empathy for and caring of others. We need for being connected to others and having a place in the grand story. So I've rolled this over in my mind many times. What is the all-encompassing overriding theme? Because it seems to be, I'm very much in love with the dream, and I don't laugh as much as I cry. And it's because for me, I see it as a dream. And so that waxes and wanes in intensity, But when I'm living it as a dream, it just tears me up because I don't want it to be a dream. So what's the point? And the only thing I can come up with is the cliche. Go back to my Catholic faith. It's for God's glory. If God was if the unmanifestable, if the undefinable, what was going to manifest, what would the overall kaleidoscope, if you kept, you're getting closer, you see all the individual pieces, if you keep getting further and further away from, what does the mosaic turn into? For God's glory and love. And the last thing on that note, my raised as a Catholic, I had to go to church every morning. When I went to Catholic school from 2nd through 8th grade, and if you rode the bus, you got there early enough, you had to go to church. If you were a walker, you could walk. We had, besides church, we had catechism class. That was part of the curriculum. And, so the years later, recent years, I don't know how many years ago, I found the Baltimore Catechism on the internet. And in the beginning, it's actually pretty profound if you think about the questions. It starts with who made me? God made me. Well, who is God? God is the maker of all things, seen and unseen. Why did God make me? God made me to know, love, and serve him. I mean, they're very childish, superficial kinds of themes, but they're very deep and profound if you drill into them and take them to heart. So that could be a path for somebody, as if they, but for getting sucked into the belief, the blind belief, and the dogma, and you got to do all this stuff because it's all about making this individual ego permanent, so that this individual ego who doesn't need the body, so when the body dies, I'm going to go someplace else, and then at some point in time, I'm going to get a new body, which is going to be, more lasting and glorified and all that. Of course, that's an allegory too. You could spin that and talk about, well, what is the final resurrection sort of thing. There was a brief period of time when I lived in Raleigh, when our kids were young. I had the idea, well, I'm really not a good parent because I'm not exposing my children enough to religious ideas. I feel like I benefited from that as a child. And so I thought I would take them to church, and I tried to go to a Catholic church for a while, and it just, the Catholic churches, especially around here, they're mega churches, and they got, there's so many people in attendance. It's so noisy because you're encouraged to bring your babies, your children, everybody, and they're echo chambers. So you really can't hear anything. And then the thing, you can't go to church unless at some point you got to join. You could just kind of stay anonymous, but you couldn't take any of the sacraments. You have to show a baptismal certificate. And if you don't have one, then you got to get baptized. I didn't want to go down that route with my family. So I discovered an Episcopal church in Wake Forest. I lived in Wakefield for a while. And I went there, and I don't know, I heard sermons from the minister there that were just, maybe it was the time, that where my head was at, but I often teared up in church because they were so meaningful. But actually, what was even more meaningful was the readings. They picked things out of the Gospels and the epistles that I don't ever remember hearing in the Catholic Church. Same Bible, or both Bibles contain the same passages, even if there were different versions, but they were reading these passages, and they really had an esoteric, profound level of meaning to them that was very meaningful to me. And so, but that played out too. We finally had to stop going because the minister, wanted to come visit us. He visit us our home, and he was, that was all about saying, well, what's your level in this economic world, and are you going to join? Because the deal is you join the church, you become an official member, and you pledge a certain amount of money. And I gave money. I put money in the basket every week, but but I didn't want to sign up. And then when I realized that it's like you can't just keep going, people wonder, like, who are you? Are you with us, or are you getting us?